For most of my life, I believed something very simple. I believed family meant loyalty. I believed blood meant protection. And I believed that no matter how difficult life became, the people you sacrificed everything for would one day look back and realize exactly how much you had given them. It took me 31 years to understand how dangerously wrong I had been. And strangely enough, the lesson began on what should have been one of the happiest nights of my father's life. My father, Richard Bennett, was turning 65. If you had asked anyone in our city who Richard Bennett was, they would have called him a respected businessman. For over 3 decades, he had built Bennett Logistics, one of the most successful regional transportation companies in the state. Trucks, warehouses, shipping contracts. What started as one struggling delivery van had eventually become a multi-million-dollar company. People admired him. Employees respected him. Competitors feared him. And my entire life, I had dedicated myself to helping him build that empire. I'm Elena Bennett. And for 12 years, I had been the invisible foundation holding our family business together. But invisible things are strange. People only notice them after they disappear. That evening, our entire family had gathered at my parents' estate on the north side of the city. The house itself was enormous. White stone exterior. 3 floors. Massive glass windows overlooking the lake. The kind of home people stopped their cars to stare at when driving past. Ironically, I had helped pay for it. Not directly, but through years of unpaid sacrifices. Years of 18-hour workdays. Years of turning down better job offers because my father constantly reminded me of something. Family comes first, Elena. I had believed him. God, I really believed him. I arrived 3 hours early that evening because, like always, I was responsible for organizing everything. My mother, Diane Bennett, stood in the kitchen pretending to supervise catering staff while scrolling through her phone. She barely looked up when I walked inside. "Oh good," she said casually. "The flowers haven't arrived yet. Can you call the florist?" No hello. No smile. No thank you. Nothing unusual. That had always been our relationship. My mother never disliked me exactly, but she had always reserved a softness for my younger brother Daniel that I had never experienced. Daniel was 28, 3 years younger than me. And if I'm being completely honest, Daniel had spent most of his adult life failing upward. He dropped out of college twice. Started 3 businesses that all collapsed within months. Borrowed money constantly. Changed girlfriends like changing shirts. Yet somehow, my parents never seemed disappointed in him. Every mistake he made came with excuses. He's still figuring life out. He has potential. You know, Daniel struggles with pressure. Meanwhile, I graduated top of my class. Rejected opportunities at major firms. Joined my father's company immediately after university. Worked weekends. Missed birthdays. Canceled vacations. Spent over a decade helping grow Bennett Logistics from 8 employees to over 200. But somehow, I was simply expected to do those things. Success was never celebrated when it came from me. It was merely expected. I remember standing in the kitchen arranging centerpieces while watching my mother laugh quietly over something on her phone. "Daniel coming early?" I asked. She smiled immediately. That smile. The one reserved only for him. "Yes," she said. "He has something exciting to share tonight." Something about the way she said it made my stomach tighten. I couldn't explain why, but suddenly I felt uneasy. By 6:30, relatives had started arriving. My Aunt Claire. My Uncle Howard. Several cousins. Family friends. Longtime business associates. The entire house filled with expensive perfume, laughter, polished shoes against marble floors, and the artificial warmth families perform when appearances matter more than relationships. I moved constantly. Greeting guests. Checking decorations. Coordinating servers. Making sure everything looked perfect. At one point, my Uncle Howard stopped beside me holding a glass of whiskey. He smiled. "You work too hard, Elena." I laughed quietly. "Someone has to." He nodded. then said something that stayed with me. "You've done more for your father than most children ever do." At the time, I thought those words were kindness. I didn't realize how cruelly ironic they would become less than an hour later. At exactly 7 o'clock, my father finally entered. The room erupted into applause. He wore a charcoal gray suit tailored perfectly against his broad shoulders. Even at 65, Richard Bennett carried himself like a man who believed he controlled every room he entered. Daniel followed beside him. And immediately, I noticed something strange. Daniel was smiling too much. Not normal smiling. Not casual happiness. No, this was something else. It was the expression of someone carrying a secret. The kind of smile people wear when they know something everyone else doesn't. My father walked toward me, placed one hand against my shoulder, and smiled. Beautiful event. I smiled back. "Happy birthday, Dad." 3 words. So simple. So normal. I had absolutely no idea those would be the last peaceful words I would ever say to him. Dinner began shortly afterward. Long polished dining table. Crystal glasses. Soft piano music playing through hidden speakers. Luxury everywhere. Everyone talking comfortably. Laughing. Celebrating. I remember feeling exhausted but strangely satisfied. 12 years. 12 years helping build my father's dream. And nights like this always reminded me why I had stayed. Because no matter how difficult work became, I believed I was building our future. A family legacy. Something permanent. Something meaningful. Halfway through dessert, my father stood. He gently tapped his wine glass. Instant silence filled the room. I smiled automatically. I expected a normal birthday speech. Maybe gratitude. Maybe stories about the company. Maybe a reflection on family. Instead, my father reached beneath the table and lifted a thick black leather folder. The moment I saw it, something cold moved through my chest. I didn't know why, but suddenly I felt danger. My father cleared his throat, then smiled proudly. "I've spent 35 years building the life our family enjoys today." The guests nodded politely. My father continued. "But lately, I've been thinking about legacy." Again, normal. Nothing strange. Then he said the sentence that changed my life forever. "I've decided it's time to officially pass everything on to the next generation." Applause erupted instantly. I smiled uncertainly. I assumed he meant eventually. Years from now. Retirement planning. Normal family business transition. Then he opened the folder, pulled out several papers, and looked directly toward Daniel. His voice filled the room. Effective immediately. He paused dramatically. "Ownership of Bennett Logistics, all associated assets, our rental properties, and majority financial holdings are now being transferred entirely to Daniel Bennett." Silence. Absolute silence. I stopped breathing. For several seconds, I genuinely thought I had misunderstood him. My brain refused to process the words. Transferred to Daniel. Entirely. I looked around the room. Everyone looked stunned. Except my mother. She was smiling. And Daniel. Daniel looked like Christmas had arrived early. My father continued speaking, but I couldn't hear anything. My ears were ringing violently. My chest tightened. Something deep inside me was collapsing faster than I could understand. Finally, I forced words out. "Wait." The room turned toward me. My voice shook. "What?" My father looked irritated. Not guilty. Irritated. As if I had interrupted something important. I stared directly at him. "You're transferring everything." I swallowed hard. "To Daniel?" My father nodded calmly. "Yes." One word. One devastating word. I stared at him. "But..." My voice cracked. "I've worked in this company for 12 years. Nobody spoke." My father folded his hands together, then said words that would haunt me for years. "Elena, you've always been independent." I blinked slowly. I didn't understand. He continued. "You're strong. You can build your own future." Then he looked proudly toward Daniel. Daniel needs more support. I remember the exact feeling that hit me then. It wasn't anger. Not immediately. It was disbelief. Pure disbelief. I stared at my mother. Surely she would say something. Surely she understood how insane this was. Instead, she softly nodded in agreement. We discussed it carefully. Those 5 words hurt more than anything my father had said. Because suddenly I understood. This wasn't spontaneous. This wasn't emotional. This wasn't last minute. They had planned this. Together. For weeks. Maybe months. And nobody had thought I deserved to know. I turned toward Daniel. He leaned casually against his chair, wearing the most arrogant expression I had ever seen on his face. I stared at him. You knew. He smirked. Relax, Elena. Relax. I actually laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because my mind couldn't process how surreal this felt. Relax. 12 years. Thousands of sleepless nights. Missed relationships. Personal sacrifices. And he wanted me to relax. I slowly stood. My chair scraped loudly against hardwood floors. The sound echoed through the silent dining room. I looked directly at my father. I helped build this company. My father nodded. Yes. I stared harder. I spent 12 years there. Yes. I felt my heartbeat rising violently. Then how exactly does Daniel deserve everything? My father's expression hardened. The softness disappeared. And suddenly I realized something terrifying. He genuinely believed he was being fair. Elena. His voice turned colder. Daniel has a wife now. I stared blankly. My father continued. He has responsibilities. I whispered quietly. And I don't. My mother suddenly interrupted. Don't make tonight difficult. That sentence. That stupid sentence. Something inside me snapped. I turned toward her. Difficult. My voice rose sharply. 12 years of my life disappear in one sentence, and you're worried about tonight being difficult? Several relatives looked deeply uncomfortable. Daniel rolled his eyes. Then he made the biggest mistake of his life. He laughed. Actually laughed. And said, Come on, Elena. I looked at him. He leaned forward smiling. You act like you own the company. The room went silent again. My entire body went cold. Because suddenly I understood something I should have realized years earlier. They never saw me as family. They saw me as useful. That was all. I was labor. Dependable labor. Loyal labor. Convenient labor. And now, they were replacing me. I looked around the table one last time. 30 faces staring back. Nobody speaking. Nobody defending me. Not one person. I looked at my father. And quietly asked one final question. So after everything I gave you? My throat tightened painfully. I get nothing? My father answered instantly. No hesitation. No emotion. Nothing. You'll be fine. 3 words. That was my value. You'll be fine. 12 years reduced to 3 words. I stood there staring at the man I had spent my entire adult life trying to make proud. And for the first time, I saw a stranger. I reached for my purse, picked up my coat, and began walking toward the front door. Behind me, my mother's voice echoed. Elena, don't be dramatic. I stopped walking. Without turning around, I answered quietly. No. Silence. Then I opened the door. Cold night air hit my face. And I stepped outside. I heard nobody follow me. Not my father. Not my mother. Not Daniel. Nobody. I reached my car parked beside the long stone driveway. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice. The moment I finally sat behind the steering wheel, everything broke. I started crying harder than I had cried in years. Not quiet tears. Violent tears. The kind that leave your chest aching. I sat there for nearly 20 minutes staring back at the enormous mansion. The house I had helped pay for. The life I had helped build. The family I had spent decades trying to protect. And suddenly I understood something terrifying. I had wasted 12 years earning love that was never mine to receive. Finally, I started the engine, pulled away slowly, and drove into the darkness. I had no plan, no destination, no idea what came next. But one thing had become brutally clear. I was completely alone. What I didn't know that night was that 6 months later, the same people sitting comfortably inside that mansion would be standing at my door, begging me for help. And by then, everything would have changed. There's a strange kind of silence that comes after betrayal. Not the silence in a room after an argument. Not the silence you feel when someone leaves. No, I'm talking about the kind of silence that happens when your entire identity collapses overnight. The kind of silence where your mind keeps replaying the same moment again and again, desperately trying to find logic in something that simply makes no sense. That was exactly where I found myself the morning after I left my parents' house. I woke up inside my car. My neck hurt. My back felt stiff. The windows were fogged from the cold night air, and for several seconds I genuinely forgot where I was. Then I remembered. The birthday dinner. The documents. My father's voice. "You'll be fine." I stared through the windshield as those 3 words repeated inside my head like a cruel recording. You'll be fine. Funny how people say those words when they've already decided your pain isn't their problem anymore. I looked at my phone sitting beside me. 23 notifications. For one brief second, hope rose inside me. Maybe my father regretted what happened. Maybe my mother had realized how cruel they had been. Maybe Daniel. I stopped myself. I picked up the phone and unlocked it. 22 emails from work. 1 advertisement. No calls. No messages. Nothing from my family. Not one person had reached out. I laughed bitterly. It wasn't a painful laugh. It was worse. It was the laugh you make when reality finally stops pretending to care about your feelings. I sat there another 10 minutes before forcing myself to move. I drove aimlessly through downtown until I stopped outside a small coffee shop near the industrial district. Normally, I would already be at Bennett Logistics by 8 in the morning, checking shipment schedules, handling supplier disputes, managing payroll approvals, solving whatever disaster my father couldn't handle personally. For 12 years my mornings followed exactly the same pattern. And suddenly, I had nowhere to go. I sat inside the cafe staring at strangers moving through their routines. Business meetings. Students studying. Couples laughing. Normal life continuing exactly as before. Meanwhile, mine had exploded overnight. I ordered coffee and opened my banking app. The number on the screen made my stomach tighten immediately. $11,842. That was everything I had. Everything. Most people hearing that number might think it sounded comfortable. It wasn't. Because for 12 years, I had never focused on building personal savings. Every bonus I earned went back into the company. Every raise my father promised somehow got postponed because we were reinvesting for future growth. Future growth. God, I was an idiot. I had spent over a decade helping build a multi-million-dollar company. And legally, I owned absolutely nothing. Not one share. Not one asset. Not one contract. Nothing. I suddenly understood the cruel brilliance behind what my father had done. He hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. He had positioned me perfectly to leave with empty hands. I stared down at my coffee, feeling something dangerous beginning to grow inside me. Not sadness. That had already burned itself out. No. This was anger. Cold anger. The kind that makes everything suddenly become clear. I spent the rest of that morning apartment hunting. The reality hit hard. Without stable employment history outside the family company and limited savings, landlords suddenly treated me like a risk. By evening, I found a tiny 1-bedroom apartment on the south side of the city. The building looked depressing. Old brick walls. Faded paint peeling near the entrance. A broken elevator with a handwritten sign taped against the door. The apartment itself was worse. Cracked ceiling corners. Small bathroom. Thin walls. Cheap carpet stained near the windows. I stood inside that empty space, trying not to think about where I had slept just 24 hours earlier. A guest bedroom bigger than this entire apartment existed inside the mansion I had helped build. I signed the lease immediately. 3 months deposit. Nearly half my savings disappeared instantly. That first night, I sat cross-legged on the bare floor eating takeout noodles directly from the carton. No furniture. No television. No family. No plan. And for the first time in my adult life, I allowed myself to ask a question I had avoided for years. Who was I without Bennett Logistics? The answer terrified me. Because for 12 years, I had built my entire identity around serving my father's dream. Not my own. His. And now that dream belonged to Daniel. I barely slept. The next morning I returned to Bennett Logistics one final time. Not because I wanted reconciliation. I needed closure. Walking through those familiar glass doors felt surreal. The receptionist, Megan, looked shocked seeing me. Elena. I forced a smile. Morning. She hesitated. Her eyes shifted nervously toward the executive offices. Something felt wrong immediately. I walked past her, opened the conference room door, and froze. Daniel sat at the head of the table. My chair. The chair I had occupied during management meetings for nearly a decade. He was laughing with 2 department supervisors. The moment he saw me, his smile widened. Well, he leaned back confidently. Look who came back. I stared at him silently. Daniel stood slowly. He was wearing one of our father's expensive Italian suits. The image almost made me sick. I'm here for my things, I said quietly. Daniel shrugged casually. Sure. Then he smiled again. That arrogant smile I had hated since childhood. You know. He adjusted his watch dramatically. Dad says transitions can be difficult. I said nothing. Daniel stepped closer. Lowered his voice. You should probably start figuring out what normal jobs pay. I stared directly into his eyes. Something ugly moved there. Not confidence. Not gratitude. No. This was envy finally escaping. And suddenly I understood. Daniel had always hated me. Not openly. Not loudly. But deeply. For years he had watched me become indispensable to our father. Watched employees respect me. Watched clients request me directly. And now, he finally had what he always wanted. Control. I walked past him toward my office. Or at least, what used to be my office. The moment I opened the door, my chest tightened instantly. Everything was gone. The framed certifications. Personal notebooks. Family photos. Laptop. Awards. Empty shelves. Empty desk. Empty walls. I turned slowly. Daniel stood behind me smiling. Oh yeah. He crossed his arms. We cleared everything out last night. Last night. Meaning while I sat crying alone in my car. They were erasing me. I stared at him. You cleaned out my office? Daniel shrugged. You don't work here anymore. I nodded slowly. Then quietly asked, did you ever hate me? His expression changed slightly. I saw surprise flash across his face. Then he laughed softly. Hate you? He shook his head. No. Pause. Then. I hated watching Dad trust you more than me. There it was. Raw truth. 20 years of resentment finally exposed. Daniel stepped closer. You always thought you were better than everyone. I stared calmly. I was better than you. The smile vanished instantly. For several seconds, we simply stared at each other. Then I walked away. No shouting. No argument. No tears. I left the building for the final time. And something inside me shifted permanently. For 12 years, I had been loyal, obedient, patient, forgiving. That woman no longer existed. Over the next 2 weeks, reality became brutal. Furniture, rent, utility bills, car payments, insurance, food. I watched money disappear faster than I imagined possible. I sold jewelry I hadn't worn in years. Canceled subscriptions. Stopped eating out entirely. I found temporary consulting work helping a small warehouse company optimize inventory systems. The pay was humiliating compared to what I used to manage. But pride had become expensive. 3 weeks later, the humiliation got worse. I was grocery shopping late one evening when my phone buzzed repeatedly. My friend Natalie had sent several screenshots. I opened the first image and instantly felt my chest tighten. Daniel, standing beside my father inside the executive office. Huge champagne bottle in hand. Both smiling. Caption: officially taking over the Bennett Empire. New generation begins today. I stared silently. Second photo. Daniel sitting inside a brand new black Mercedes. Caption: success tastes better when it's earned. Earned. I actually laughed out loud inside the grocery store. Earned. That car cost more than my annual salary. And technically, I helped pay for it. Third photo. Luxury rooftop restaurant. Daniel with friends holding expensive whiskey. Caption: celebrating the future. Big things coming. I closed my phone immediately. Something inside me twisted painfully. It wasn't jealousy. It was something worse. It was watching someone steal years of your life and then publicly celebrate taking it. I suddenly couldn't breathe properly. I abandoned my shopping cart and walked outside. Cold air hit my face sharply. I leaned against the brick wall trying to steady myself. Then something unexpected happened. A memory surfaced. 2 years earlier. Conference room meeting. I had proposed modernizing our shipping systems using automated route software. It would reduce fuel costs by 30%. Increase delivery speed. Improve inventory forecasting. I remembered presenting the full plan excitedly. My father listened, then dismissed everything. Too risky. 3 months later, I proposed automated warehouse scanning systems. Rejected. 6 months later, I proposed expanding digital freight partnerships. Rejected again. Because my father hated innovation. He trusted old methods. Then suddenly, the strangest thought entered my mind. What if they were all wrong? What if everything I had built for years, everything I had learned, everything I knew about logistics, had value beyond my father's company? I stood there breathing heavily as an entirely new idea formed. For the first time in years, I stopped thinking about what I had lost and started thinking about what I still possessed. Knowledge, experience, strategy, 12 years of operational expertise. The company wasn't successful because of Richard Bennett. Not entirely. I had quietly become the system keeping everything functioning. And now, that system belonged only to me. The next morning, I withdrew nearly every dollar left in savings. Rented a small warehouse 20 miles outside downtown. Old building. Cheap lease. Terrible location. But enough space to start. I bought second-hand desks. Used computers. Basic software licenses. Whiteboards. Folding chairs. Nothing fancy. No investors. No family money. No backup plan. Just me. I sat alone inside that empty warehouse staring at the walls. This was insane. I had maybe 4 months before money disappeared completely. Failure meant bankruptcy. But strangely, I felt alive. For the first time in years. Every decision belonged to me. I opened my laptop. Created company registration documents. Stared at the blank company name section. Then slowly typed. Phoenix Freight Solutions. Phoenix. Because some things need to burn first, before they learn how to rise again. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into brutal routine. Wake up at 5. Cold coffee. Client research. Proposal writing. Networking calls. Building operational systems. Studying market inefficiencies. Cold emailing suppliers. I worked 14, sometimes 16 hours daily. No weekends. No breaks. No excuses. Meanwhile, Daniel kept posting luxury photos online. Vacations. Watches. Designer suits. Champagne dinners. I noticed something interesting. None of it involved actual work. He looked like a man spending money faster than he understood how to make it. Exactly 3 months after leaving Bennett Logistics, my phone rang unexpectedly. Unknown number. I answered cautiously. Hello. Male voice. Professional tone. Is this Elena Bennett? Yes. This is Mark Reynolds from Atlantic Supply Group. My heart jumped. Atlantic Supply was one of our former shipping clients. Huge contract potential. He continued. We heard you started your own operation. I stayed silent. Then he said words I will never forget. To be honest. Pause. We preferred working with you. My chest tightened instantly. He continued. We've had serious problems with Bennett Logistics since you left. I sat frozen. Then Mark said, if you're ready for serious contracts, we'd like to discuss moving business over. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Because suddenly, for the first time since betrayal night, something became clear. I wasn't rebuilding. No, I was evolving. And somewhere across the city, Daniel had absolutely no idea. The empire they handed him was already beginning to crack. There's a dangerous illusion people create when success stays around too long. They begin believing success belongs to the person standing at the top. They forget the invisible hands underneath quietly holding everything together. For 12 years, I had been one of those invisible hands. And 6 months after leaving Bennett Logistics, the consequences of removing me had finally started spreading. I still remember sitting alone in my warehouse office staring at the phone after finishing my call with Mark Reynolds from Atlantic Supply Group. The words kept replaying in my mind. Simple sentence. But after everything I had endured, it felt like oxygen returning after months underwater. For 6 months, I had questioned myself constantly. Maybe my father was right. Maybe I wasn't as important as I believed. Maybe Bennett Logistics succeeded because of him, not me. Maybe I had exaggerated my contribution all these years. But now, for the first time, outside validation had shattered those doubts. A company worth millions had specifically reached out to me. Not because of my father's reputation. Not because of family connections. Because they trusted my work. I leaned back slowly in my chair staring at the half-empty warehouse around me. Metal shelves still waiting to be installed. Old computers humming softly. Whiteboard covered in route projections. Cheap folding chairs stacked near the wall. Nothing about this place looked impressive. Yet somehow, it felt more valuable than every luxury room inside my parents' mansion. Because everything here belonged to me. Not inherited. Not gifted. Earned. I spent the next 3 days negotiating terms with Atlantic Supply. When the contract finally came through, I sat frozen staring at the numbers. It wasn't huge by corporate standards. But for a startup company barely surviving on borrowed hope, it changed everything. My first serious client. The first proof I wasn't rebuilding a life. I was building freedom. For the first time in months. I smiled. Then less than 24 hours later, everything started changing faster than I expected. It began with another phone call. This time from someone I recognized immediately. Samantha Pierce, Senior Operations Manager at Bennett Logistics. She had worked beside me for nearly 7 years. Smart, efficient, blunt, and one of the very few people in the company I genuinely trusted. I answered quickly. Samantha. Her voice sounded exhausted. Elena. Long pause. Then quietly. You should know what's happening over here. Something in her tone made my stomach tighten instantly. I stood from my chair. What happened? She exhaled heavily. Daniel is destroying everything. I said nothing. Part of me had expected problems eventually. Daniel knew almost nothing about real operational management. But hearing those words still hit differently. Samantha continued. The first month after you left. She paused. He started changing everything. I leaned against the desk listening carefully. He fired our senior dispatch supervisor. I frowned. Tom. Yes. Why? Samantha laughed bitterly. Daniel said Tom lacked innovation. My jaw tightened. Tom Harper had been with Bennett Logistics for 23 years. He practically knew every major supplier in 3 states. Firing him was insanity. But Samantha wasn't finished. Then Daniel replaced our route scheduling system. I blinked. With what? Some expensive automation software he bought online. Cold fear moved through me immediately. I knew exactly where this was going. That software required months of calibration, training, data migration, careful implementation. Done wrong. Entire shipping schedules collapse. I asked quietly, "How bad?" Samantha answered instantly, "Very bad." She continued speaking. Missed delivery deadlines, truck dispatch errors, inventory mismatches, late supplier payments, driver scheduling failures. Within 6 weeks, small operational mistakes had begun multiplying into major financial damage. I closed my eyes listening, because I could see the entire disaster unfolding perfectly. Daniel didn't understand systems. He only understood appearances. He believed leadership meant making dramatic decisions. But logistics companies survive through invisible details. Thousands of tiny systems functioning perfectly behind the scenes. Disrupt enough of those systems, and collapse becomes inevitable. Samantha lowered her voice. 3 major clients already terminated contracts. My eyes opened immediately. Who? She listed names. Each one hit harder than the last. Companies I personally spent years building relationships with. Millions in revenue disappearing. Then Samantha said something unexpected. Employees are leaving too. I frowned. How many? 27. I stared silently. 27 employees leaving inside weeks wasn't normal. It meant internal panic had already spread. And panic inside operational companies becomes contagious. The moment employees lose confidence, everything accelerates. I finally asked the obvious question. What is Dad doing? Silence. Then Samantha answered quietly. He refuses to admit Daniel caused this. Of course he did. My father had always treated accountability like weakness. Admitting Daniel was failing meant admitting he had made a catastrophic mistake. And Richard Bennett was a man who feared embarrassment more than consequences. Samantha spoke again. Elena. Pause. We all know you were the reason this company worked. Those words hit harder than I expected. Because suddenly memories started flooding back. Late nights fixing payroll errors. Rebuilding damaged supplier relationships. Negotiating emergency contracts after storms delayed shipments. Solving legal disputes quietly before they reached my father. Training managers personally. Creating contingency systems nobody ever noticed. I had spent 12 years protecting the company from invisible disasters. And, because I made it look effortless, nobody ever realized how much damage I prevented daily. Until I disappeared. I thanked Samantha and ended the call. Then I stood inside the warehouse staring blankly ahead. I expected satisfaction hearing all this. Revenge maybe. Validation. But strangely, I felt nothing. Not happiness. Not anger. Just clarity. For years I had believed my family gave me purpose. The truth was uglier. I had given them stability. And they confused that stability with something permanent. They assumed I would always be there. Now they were learning exactly what absence costs. 3 days later, my phone buzzed unexpectedly. The screen made me freeze. Mom. I stared at the name silently. For 6 months. Nothing. No concern. No apology. No explanation. And now suddenly. Mom. I let it ring. Then voicemail notification appeared seconds later. I ignored it. 30 minutes later. Phone rang again. Dad. I stared at the screen. Ignored again. 5 minutes later. Daniel. I laughed quietly. Interesting. 3 members of my family calling within the same hour after 6 months of silence. That wasn't coincidence. Something had happened. I placed the phone face down and returned to work. 2 hours later. Natalie arrived unexpectedly carrying takeout food. She smiled walking inside the warehouse. Thought you forgot humans exist. I smiled slightly. Natalie had been my closest friend since college. Unlike most people, she had seen through my family dynamic years earlier. I never listened. She placed food on the desk, then immediately noticed my expression. What happened? I told her everything. Atlantic contract. Samantha's phone call. Company problems. Family suddenly calling again. Natalie listened quietly, then leaned back folding her arms. You know what this means, right? I looked at her. She smiled knowingly. They finally realized you were the company. I said nothing, because deep down, I knew she was right. Natalie opened my phone. Played Mom's voicemail. Her voice sounded shaky. Elena. Long pause. Then crying. We need to talk. I stared blankly. Natalie stopped playback. Interesting. I frowned. What? She leaned forward. That isn't apology crying. I stared. She smiled coldly. That's desperation crying. Something about those words stayed with me. Desperation. For years, my family operated through power imbalance. They controlled resources, approval, access, status. And I remained obedient because subconsciously, I feared losing their acceptance. But now, power had shifted. For the first time in my life, I needed absolutely nothing from them. That realization felt dangerous, freeing, terrifying, exciting. 3 more days passed. Then Samantha called again. This time, her voice sounded genuinely frightened. Elena. What happened? She answered immediately. Your father took out loans. My chest tightened. What kind of loans? Personal. I stood instantly. How much? Long silence. Then, almost 4 million. I couldn't speak. For $1 million. That wasn't cash flow management. That was emergency damage control. Samantha continued. He used family properties as collateral. I felt cold immediately. The mansion. Rental properties. Vacation house. Everything. My father had leveraged family assets, meaning the company's internal finances had deteriorated faster than anyone expected. I sat slowly, trying to calculate mentally. Lost contracts. Employee turnover. Operational failures. Debt obligations. For $1 million emergency loan. This was worse than I imagined. Then Samantha said something terrifying. There are investor lawsuits coming. My heartbeat slowed instantly. Investor lawsuits meant confidence had collapsed externally too. Once outside stakeholders panic, banks start moving. Legal pressure escalates. Insurance partners retreat. Recovery becomes almost impossible. I whispered quietly. How bad is Daniel? Samantha laughed bitterly. He still thinks everything is temporary. Of course he did. Because Daniel had never experienced consequences. His entire life someone cleaned up behind him. Failed businesses. Paid debts. Broken promises. Family excuses. My father spent decades protecting him from reality. And now reality had arrived all at once. For the first time in my life, I almost pitied him. Almost. That evening, I drove past my parents' estate for the first time since leaving. I don't know why. Maybe curiosity. Maybe unfinished pain. The mansion stood exactly as before. Perfect landscaping. Fountain near the driveway. Luxury cars parked outside. From a distance, nothing looked different. But I knew better now. Sometimes collapse begins internally long before visible damage appears. Just like families. I sat parked across the street remembering birthday night. The betrayal. Daniel laughing. My father saying, "You'll be fine." I smiled bitterly. Funny. I was fine. Better than fine. And somewhere inside that enormous house, they were slowly losing everything. Then suddenly, headlights appeared behind me. Black sedan pulling beside the curb. I frowned. The driver door opened. And my stomach tightened instantly. My father stepped out. Richard Bennett. But something was wrong. 6 months earlier, he looked powerful, controlled, sharp. Now, he looked older, much older. Gray hair more visible, shoulders lower, face exhausted. For several seconds, he simply stared at my car, then slowly walked closer. I lowered the window halfway. Neither of us spoke. Finally, he said my name, Elena. Strange. I had imagined this moment for months. Confrontation, anger, closure. Yet hearing his voice now felt oddly empty. I stared calmly. What do you want? My father looked uncomfortable. The man who once controlled every room now struggled finding words. Finally, he spoke quietly. We need to talk. I stared silently, then asked, about what? His jaw tightened slightly. Pride fighting desperation. Then he answered, the company. Of course. Not I miss you. Not I'm sorry. Not I made a mistake. The company. Always the company. I almost laughed. I looked directly at him and asked one simple question. Dad. Long pause. Would you be standing here if Daniel had succeeded? He froze instantly. Didn't answer. Didn't move. Didn't even blink. And that silence told me everything. I started raising the window. Suddenly he stepped forward, panic entering his voice. Elena, wait. I stopped. He swallowed hard, then quietly said words I never thought I would hear. We need your help. 3 words. Simple. Heavy. Almost surreal. 6 months earlier, I had begged for fairness. He gave me nothing. Now, he stood outside asking for rescue. I stared at him calmly, then softly answered, no, and drove away. What I didn't know yet was that the next knock on my apartment door would change everything, because soon, my entire family would come begging. And by then, I had already begun planning something none of them saw coming. There's something strangely powerful about watching people finally understand your value, only after they've already lost access to you. For most of my life, I chased approval, especially from my father. Every achievement, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every difficult decision, everything I did somehow carried one hidden motivation. Maybe this time, he'll finally be proud of me. Maybe this time, he'll see me. But sitting in my car that night after driving away from him, after hearing Richard Bennett, the man who had thrown away 12 years of my life, quietly admit he needed my help, something inside me shifted permanently. For the first time in 31 years, I no longer wanted his approval. And strangely enough, that freedom felt more valuable than money. I drove home through silent streets replaying our conversation repeatedly. Not because I doubted my answer. No, because I finally understood something. My father had never changed. Even standing there beside my car, exhausted and desperate. He hadn't apologized. He hadn't acknowledged what he did. He hadn't admitted betraying me. He simply wanted access to what I could provide. My usefulness. Nothing more. And that realization made my decision easier. I walked into my apartment feeling strangely calm. The kind of calm people experience after emotional storms finally end. I showered, changed clothes, made coffee, then sat near the window staring into darkness. Normally after encounters with my family, I spiraled emotionally. Not tonight. Tonight, I was thinking strategically. Because over the last several weeks, something important had happened behind the scenes. And nobody in my family knew. Not my father. Not Daniel. Not my mother. Not even former employees. For months, I had quietly been monitoring Bennett logistics, public financial disclosures, supplier disputes, pending debt restructuring, loan filings, insurance withdrawals, contract terminations. Most people didn't realize how predictable corporate collapse becomes once enough systems begin failing simultaneously. I knew exactly what stage they were entering. Desperation financing. And desperation financing creates opportunities. Dangerous opportunities. I reached for my laptop, opened several documents, reviewed numbers again carefully, then smiled. Because 6 weeks earlier, I had already started making moves. Moves nobody saw coming. The next morning my phone exploded. 11 missed calls. Mom. Dad. Daniel. Dad again. Mom. Unknown number. Lawyer office. I ignored all of them. Instead, I drove directly toward downtown. Tall glass building. 28 floors. Black marble entrance. The law firm handling several commercial debt restructuring accounts in the city. Harrison and Cole Financial Recovery Group. I entered quietly. Receptionist smiled. Ms. Bennett. I nodded. Mr. Harrison is waiting. I stepped inside a conference room where Thomas Harrison stood reviewing paperwork. Late 50s. Expensive suit. Sharp eyes. The kind of lawyer people hire when millions are at stake. He smiled professionally. Good morning, Elena. I sat calmly. Tell me where we are. He adjusted several documents, then answered. Worse than expected. I smiled slightly. Good. He continued. Richard Bennett leveraged nearly all family property to secure emergency operating loans. I nodded. Already knew that. Thomas continued. Default triggers begin in 14 days, meaning bankruptcy protection would likely fail soon. Exactly what I wanted. He slid documents toward me. If we proceed now. He paused. Your holding corporation can purchase majority debt ownership through the bank restructuring package. I stared at the papers quietly. Most people hearing this conversation wouldn't understand its significance. Let me explain simply. Over the last 6 weeks, I had been using profits from Phoenix Freight Solutions combined with outside private investors quietly arranged through Natalie's finance connections. Together, we had positioned enough capital to purchase controlling portions of Bennett Logistics' outstanding debt. Which meant one thing. The moment Bennett Logistics defaulted, creditors would no longer control the company. I would. Legally. Quietly. Completely. Thomas folded his hands. Are you certain? I looked directly at him, then answered calmly. Absolutely. He nodded. Signed papers moved across the table. I picked up the pen. And in less than 30 seconds, the company I had spent 12 years building for someone else quietly started becoming mine again. But this time, entirely mine. No father. No brother. No family ownership. No manipulation. Just me. I signed. Thomas smiled. It's done. Strange. I expected triumph. Celebration. Satisfaction. Instead, I felt peace. Deep peace. Because justice doesn't always arrive through revenge. Sometimes justice simply means reclaiming what should never have been taken. 3 days passed. Then finally, the moment arrived. Rain hammered against apartment windows violently that evening. I was sitting on the couch reviewing shipment schedules when suddenly, knock. 3 sharp knocks. Slow. Heavy. I already knew who it was. I stood quietly, walked toward the door, opened it, and froze. There they were. My family, but not the family I remembered. My mother looked destroyed. Eyes swollen red. Mascara streaked downward from crying. Hair messy. Clothes wrinkled. Daniel stood behind her looking pale. Gone were expensive watches. Designer suits. Cocky smile. Confidence. He looked terrified. And my father. God. Richard Bennett looked 20 years older. His shoulders collapsed inward. Gray hair fully visible now. Face exhausted. The powerful businessman I spent my entire life fearing was gone. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Finally, my mother broke first. Tears immediately. Elena. Her voice cracked violently. Then she grabbed my hand desperately. Please. More tears. We need help. I stared at her face calmly. Strange. 6 months ago, seeing my mother cry would have destroyed me emotionally. Tonight? Nothing. I felt absolutely nothing. I stepped aside. Come in. They entered slowly. Nobody spoke. Rain hit windows softly. Silence filled the apartment. The irony almost felt poetic. 6 months earlier, I slept here alone with nothing. Tiny apartment. Cheap furniture. Bare survival. Meanwhile, they enjoyed luxury inside the mansion I helped build. Now, they stood inside my small apartment begging. Funny how life works. My father finally sat across from me, hands trembling slightly, then quietly began speaking. The bank. He swallowed hard. Is taking everything. I said nothing. My mother immediately began crying again. The house. Tears. Our properties. More crying. Everything is gone. Daniel stared downward, refusing eye contact. Finally, he spoke quietly. I made mistakes. Mistakes. Interesting word choice. Not betrayal. Not greed. Not arrogance. Mistakes. I stared directly at him. You laughed. He looked confused. I continued quietly. At dinner. Silence. I leaned forward. When Dad transferred everything to you. My voice sharpened. You laughed while I lost 12 years of my life. Daniel looked ashamed. But I wasn't finished. Do you remember what you said? Nobody moved. I smiled coldly. You said I acted like I owned the company. Daniel's breathing became uneven. My mother whispered. Elena. I raised my hand, stopping her immediately. Then looked directly at my father. And you? Silence. I stared hard. Do you remember what you told me? He looked away. I repeated slowly. You'll be fine. My father closed his eyes. Shame finally appearing. Good. Finally. He whispered quietly. I made a mistake. There it was. The sentence I waited months to hear. But strangely, it meant nothing now. Because apologies arriving after consequences aren't remorse. They're survival instincts. My mother reached across the table. Please save the company. There it was. Not save us. Save the company. Always business. Always usefulness. I stood slowly. Walked toward the kitchen. Returned holding a leather folder. Placed it gently on the table. My father frowned. What is this? I smiled. Calmly. Coldly. Come tomorrow morning. He looked confused. Where? I answered. Office. For a second. Hope appeared in his eyes. Dangerous mistake. He thought I had forgiven him. Good. Let him believe that. The next morning. 9 a.m. Bennett Logistics headquarters. Same glass building. Same lobby. Same conference room where I had spent 12 years helping build success. But this time, everything felt different. My father sat beside my mother. Daniel paced nervously. Several senior managers sat silently. Everyone waiting. At exactly 9:15, conference room doors opened. I entered. But I wasn't alone. 2 lawyers followed behind me. Thomas Harrison and senior banking representative Laura Simmons. The room immediately shifted. My father stood. Confused. Elena, what is this? I walked calmly toward the table. Placed several thick legal documents down. Then sat. Silence. Thomas Harrison adjusted his glasses. Then began speaking professionally. As of this morning. He opened paperwork. Majority ownership rights regarding Bennett Logistics' outstanding secured debt have been legally transferred. My father frowned deeply. Transferred to who? Thomas looked toward me. Then answered. MS. Elena Bennett. Silence. Total silence. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Daniel stared blankly. What? Thomas continued. Through a holding corporation and creditor restructuring package. He paused. MS. Bennett now controls majority debt rights attached to Bennett Logistics assets. My father slowly sat down. Face pale. Daniel shook his head repeatedly. No, that isn't possible. I looked directly at him. Then calmly explained. Simple version? I smiled faintly. I own the future of this company now. My mother gasped loudly. Daniel exploded first, jumping from his chair. You planned this. I remained calm. He slammed both hands against the table. You did this on purpose. I stared coldly. No. Pause. Then. You did this. Silence. Daniel breathing heavily. My father stared at documents trembling. Finally. He looked at me. Broken. Completely broken. Please. God. Hearing Richard Bennett say please felt surreal. He whispered again. Don't do this. I slowly stood. Looked around the same conference room where 6 months earlier my entire life collapsed. Then finally, I spoke. Slowly. Clearly. Every word carrying 12 years of pain. For 12 years. Silence. I gave everything to this company. I looked toward my father. I skipped birthdays. Toward mother. I sacrificed relationships. Toward Daniel. I built systems none of you even understood. Pause. Breathing steady. Then. And the moment success arrived, I stared hard. You erased me. Tears streamed down my mother's face. Daniel shaking violently. My father unable to speak. I stepped closer. Then delivered the sentence I carried for months. You gave away my future like I never existed. Long silence. Then finally. Today. I placed one hand against legal documents. I'm taking back everything that was always mine. Daniel whispered weakly. Please. I looked directly at him. Cold. Final. But this time. Silence. Entire room frozen. Then. None of you come with it. My father closed his eyes. My mother broke down crying. Daniel collapsed back into his chair. Finished. Completely finished. 3 months later. Bennett Logistics officially merged under Phoenix Freight Solutions. I restructured everything. Rehired old employees. Restored damaged contracts. Revenue tripled faster than expected. The mansion sold under creditor liquidation. Vacation properties disappeared. Daniel moved out of state. I never asked where. My mother sent letters. I never replied. Then one evening, a final envelope arrived. Handwritten. My father. Inside. Only one sentence. I finally understand what I lost. I stared at those words quietly. Then folded the paper. And placed it in the trash. Because sometimes, revenge isn't destroying people who betrayed you. Sometimes revenge is simpler. Sometimes revenge means succeeding so completely that the people who underestimated you are forced to spend the rest of their lives remembering exactly what they threw away. And that day, I learned the most important lesson of my life. Never sacrifice your self-respect, trying to earn love from people who only value what you can do for them. Because real family never makes you prove your worth.